The purpose of this show is to guide you to realign with habits that get you to live the life you've always dreamed of. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with Jesse Ewing. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle, where you can access your full potential right now. Finally break free from destructive habits. That dream life, if you want it, you can have it. This is where you transform your health, mind, business, and relationships. Or do nothing and keep your life the way it is. But if you're ready for change, you're in the right place. This is where you're gonna learn how to live a habit-based lifestyle. You are tuning in to the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Jesse Ewing. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle. Let's go.
I got a very special guest that I'm excited. Mr. Mark Squibb, inventor of LiveO2 Therapy. LiveO2 is an oxygen training system. And Mark just let me know that part of this is been the newest Nobel Prize for oxygen therapy that goes back, I think you said it was over 100 years, right?
Yeah, so this last week, they just granted a new Nobel Prize for new innovations about how cells use oxygen. And can you believe it's been 100 years since we talked about oxygen as a leading science? The last guy that did it was Otto Warburg, when he talked about where does cancer come from. Now, over 100 years later, we're like, okay, here we go. Because that was this is 2019, and that was 1913. So that'd be 103 years.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. Well, hey,
110 years.
Yeah, I want to welcome you on the show, and I'm excited you're here. We obviously got to meet last week, and I just heard a lot about your story, but I had no idea what this thing was capable of. And we had a mutual friend recommend it several times. So I'm like, all right, I might as well have Mark on and find out exactly what this does before I get one myself. So how did this all start for you?
Well, there's probably 4 simultaneous stories, but I'll tell the first one, which is that, I've been working too hard for too long. And I'm like, man, it sure would be nice if I could start every day without being a goofball. So first was I spent some years building software companies, and I'm like, if I could be any smarter, it would do me some good.
Yeah.
And then same time or thereabouts, I had my house burned down. Well, kids ended up with some seizures, and I realized that he had some chemical damage. So I ended up being very concerned as a parent about wanting to get my boy back and get him put together. About the same time, my mom got cancer, and that drew me in to take a look at this, this whole health problem. I was personally involved. I had 2 people I love very much that were, having an issue, and I'm like, man, I got to do something about this. And so about the same time, I started really studying cell physiology. My background is an engineer. So I tend to think of things as capacitors and how do things work in supply chain. And when I started to dig into this oxygen, I saw a brand new world of ways to modulate the body and get things fired up. And I can't believe it took the Nobel guys, 100 years to come back around on this. Right. But one of the fun things that, I find and I try to do about every day is we developed a system for jump-starting the brain.
Okay. So let me ask you this. What was the first thing that you actually picked up and kind of had this aha moment? I'm on to something, or now I'm starting to see, possibly what happened or what I could work on.
Well, I was working with a sports team, basically the Cleveland Browns, and I was commuting to Cleveland every week. And, mostly I was working with linemen, and those guys get beat up pretty bad. And then there was one lineman over there that had enough concussions that he was at the leading edge of the football CTE problem. And so I was working with him, and then I was working with a bunch of the other guys that had God knows how many injuries, and they were always injured all the time. So I was working in it and just started developing accelerated recovery process. Okay. And so about the same time as when all this other stuff happened. So I had some, I'll call it really good folks to work with that were in a hurry to heal. So one of the things that hit me was when I started working with this kid named Brodney, not really a kid, he's a pro football player, but he had almost lost his ability to play. And, when we started working with him, literally in a week, his ability to come back. And I saw that and I didn't know what was going on. And at that time, it was actually before this whole NFL deal kind of came on, but there was his story. And at the same time, my son had some chemical injury, and we saw both the seizures and the loss of mental function. I was like, wow, something's going on here. So when I started using this, and I just started developing it as a personal, I'll call it anti-aging training system. And I started doing brain tests on everybody, or, the folks I was working with, including myself. Literally we saw overnight improvements in brain function. So that was my real hint that something profound was happening. So, that was the beginning. And then over the past, 7-8 years, we've worked with many people and pretty much the same result every time. But if it's not really a therapy, it's more of a training. So we've evolved it into the point where it's a simple workout that you can do almost every day.
Okay. So this all kind of happened, 7-8 years ago, maybe a little bit more?
Yeah, I started I think I had my first experience, or, my first motion back in about 2008, which would be almost 11 years ago now. And what had happened was that there was this guy named Manfred von Ardenne, who was a truly profound scientist out of Germany. And he was working with oxygen, and he wrote a book named Oxygen Multi-Step Therapy. And he went through and he did the original founding research on oxygen. And the history of that was, before he did it, they'd always give you oxygen, but you'd sit there, or somebody's sick and you'd breathe it. And he says, well, I think if we do some exercise while we're breathing oxygen, as in oxygen training, then it might make a difference. And he studied that from about 1970 to when he died, and I think about 1995. Well, it was more recent, maybe 2000. I should know my dates better. But the long story short is he did about 30 years and just totally outrageous research. The main thing that he discovered was there's this phenomenon called a tourniquet effect, which is if you have a stress event or an injury that blocks blood flow to a tissue for 90 minutes. And what happens is the vascular system itself is injured. And then when the vascular system is injured, it's not mechanically injured, but the hypoxia or loss of oxygen causes the vascular system basically to close down most of the way, so that any tissue that's served by that goes into what is basically a permanent state of no oxygen. And then as we age, this effect that builds up through our life as a result of stress events or concussions ends up shutting down different parts of our body. And what he discovered is that if you super saturate the blood and squirt it hard enough to go through these, I'll call it blockages or occlusions, then you can punch through and it'll open up and start working again. So what we were seeing, or I guess I'd call it what I was seeing with like my son and these football players and myself, is that when we train in a way that basically maximize the oxygen and simultaneously maximize the oxygen in the blood flow, we could actually break through, and all this tissue in the body that had stopped working would basically fire up. And so
this is like breaking through the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah, I won't call it the blood-brain barrier. It's about breaking through the congestion. So, like in the concussion cases, the kids they'd hit their head, and then the brain would get smushed up against one side, and it usually would bounce back and smush up against the other side. So you had bruises inside the brain. Okay. And what we were doing was we were creating enough blood flow and pressure simultaneously, more or less, to push through the closures in the vascular system and reoxygenate the brain. And what we were seeing in terms of their recoveries is the brain would just switch back on. In minutes, because all it needed was some oxygen. And so when we started doing this, and we've been doing this for, I guess I really got serious about the brain protocols in about 2013. Okay. But what happened then was we really started to see, because the story goes like this. I was working out, and then we went skiing over the weekend. And we skied up to a place called Cameron Pass. And when we got up to about 11,000 feet, man, all I could hear was my heart pounding in my head. And then I'm like, that's interesting. There's a lot of blood flow to my brain. So I came back and dug up the research. And it turns out that, when you work out hard enough to hear your heart pounding in your head, your body's squirting about 4 times more blood than normal through your brain. Okay. But you could only really establish that circuit when you're on top of a mountain, because you had to have your body hungry enough for oxygen that it would amplify the amount of blood. So to really create that, you had to train at high altitude, which is kind of the opposite of oxygen rich.
Right.
So,
when somebody gets to that place, what actually happens to them?
So the physiology is kind of basic. So our bodies are primed, or they're designed. So like, for example, if you're working out real hard and the available oxygen to the brain starts to drop, the body will bump the heart rate, and it'll open up all the veins or arteries to the brain to make sure the brain has enough oxygen. But you'll notice that most people will only get to that heart pounding in the head phase when they're running up a hill or exercising hard enough. But the blood flow circuit is actually triggered by a decrease in oxygen to the brain. Okay, so once the body perceives that decrease, that, hey, I need to send more blood to the brain, then it'll open it up and it'll maximize the flow.
Okay.
So as I'm experiencing this, I'm like, I think I could cheat. So I came back home, and we were doing, what I'll call, oxygen only reservoirs. So I modified a reservoir to go ahead and simulate an altitude, and I put a switch on it. Okay. So now you can work out, or I started working out, and I work out and I get to the point where I got the heart pounding in the head. So I got the circuit active, then I throw a switch, next breath, boom, maximum oxygen to the brain. And so that allowed me, for at least a brief period of time, maybe, a few seconds, to establish a simultaneous maximum of the volume of blood flowing through the brain. But while you're in that state, your heart and lungs are going boom, boom, boom. So you're also getting a maximum amount of oxygen into the blood. So you got simultaneous maximum blood flow and maximum oxygen concentration. So now there's an important point. The blood has different ways of carrying oxygen. So if you talk medical, what you'll see is that, it's only on the hemoglobin. Well, hemoglobin is the red blood cells. But it turns out a lot of oxygen will dissolve in the plasma, or the water part of the blood.
Sure.
So and what we were doing was we're maximizing the amount of oxygen in the water part of the blood. So even if the brain had a bruise and the red blood cells wouldn't go through, the wet part of the blood would. So, and this is looping back to Manfred von Ardenn's research, what he discovered is that once you get to a magic threshold of about 4 times normal, four atmospheres, which before the LiveO2 experience, you can only really get to in a $250,000 military hyperbaric chamber. Anyway, so when we started doing this, we could establish the maximum blood. And what was happening is we were punching through and reoxygenating the brain. And if somebody had an loss of brain function or hangover or anything where their brain wasn't working because the brain wasn't getting enough oxygen, it would switch back on.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, for people listening, I kind of wanted you to explain it to give them, like, whether you're an athlete or, maybe a businessman, to, maybe a stay-at-home mom, having 4 times the amount of oxygen to your brain is going to help you, whether you're in one of those places. It's going to help anybody. And like you said, like, I think pretty much all of us have had some type of injury to our head, or possibly stress, trauma, something. And so this really, what I'm hearing, is going to impact this in a positive way and kind of redrive the circuits in the brain to get them to start working again, or at least get more oxygen to the brain.
Yeah. The story is actually a little better. And I'm sorry if I forgot to say this, but what the research basically, once you get that circuit active, it's 4 times more blood.
Wow.
But when you throw the oxygen switch, it's 6 times more oxygen.
Okay.
So if you take 4 times more blood times 6 times more oxygen, what you're actually doing is creating an oxygen delivery potential in the brain that's 24 times normal.
Wow. Yeah,
Okay. So, and that was kind of the magic, because when you take, it doesn't matter who you are. You could be, like you say, you can be an executive or a housewife, or, a kid that's trying to be an athlete, any sort of athlete. As soon as you super oxygenate the brain, it's going to work better. And so what we started to see is and this was, a personal story, was because, I've been managing companies for a long time. My ability to manage a company and talk to people and to be able to think fast enough to be able to be nice all the time made a huge difference in my career. Because, if you're an executive, there's a real tendency for people to do things that you might consider stupid.
Right.
And having the self-discipline and the mental control not to, to be able to react to them constructively ended up making a huge difference in my ability to, have better relationships in the company. And so once I sort of caught on to this, the next thing I did was as soon as I saw somebody acting in a way that I couldn't understand, I was like, yeah, maybe I ought to get them one. So now in the company, everybody starts their day the same way, which is get your butt on LiveO2, work out, so Mark doesn't have to spend as much time irritated.
Nice. So yeah, I could see how even moms reacting, being home with their kids all day, and then they get into this reactive mode. It's like, hey, let's starting your day with this, or like you said, the managers, executives, all this is super powerful. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about this was, a lot of the work where you originally started out were people with concussions, people with, like your son. When did you know that after you've seen, your son or these guys with concussions, when did you see these guys man, we can actually change, the world with this thing, and change people's lives? But, because I think that's super powerful that you're able to do that.
Well, the thing that really caught me by surprise early was how fast the response. And if you don't mind, I can bring up a little document that kind of shows a couple of CNS or brain function
tests. Yeah, go ahead.
tests.
Bring it up.
Okay, give me a second here. Okay, this is my son, who was 11 at the time. And, what had happened was we started to see some just Tourette seizures. And it made me wonder about what was going on with him. And so I obtained this program called CNS, which is basically a pretty standard neurological panel. And anyway, any day you as a dad turn around and to give your son a test and you see that these scores are all over here in this very low category, I promise it's not a good day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what in the world is going on with my son's brain? So, the next place I went was, come along and say, okay, well, I really need to do something about this. And I was working with LiveO2. So I said, okay, Dakota, let's train. Now, by the way, it was easy because he's an athlete and was practicing archery. And when he discovered it would make him a better archer, he was all over it. So He got on there and he trained on Monday afternoon. Okay. I gave him another test on Wednesday. Within 48 hours, he went from 7 in the low category to 3 in the low category.
Wow. Very low.
Yeah, very low category. I'm sorry. But the point was the X's were marching to the left. Okay, now he turned 19 last week, and he's all pretty much in this above average with a few scores in average. And he was able to learn to speak a new language in 30 days.
Wow.
So I'm very confident that whatever was wrong here is no longer wrong as he rolls into adulthood. The other thing that, mom said was, we have always homeschooled, was that, his scholastic performance really started to rebound at this point, and it was amazing. So this was the first one. And it's kind of,
so this happened for him at age 11. And this is after 2 treatments, or
this is after one This is after one training.
Okay.
And then if I get over here, I can show you another thing. I should have opened this up before, which is let's move forward to now. Okay, and this was July 21st of 2017. So a year and a half ago. But you'll see here that most of his scores have moved all the way over, and at this point, his scores are mostly in the well above average. So, I mean, it wasn't like a miracle where he was overnight recovered, because there's different types of things that happen in the brain. So this was a chemical damage, meaning that was kind of all over the brain. But over time, he was able to bounce right back.
Yeah, and I guess again, this is about building a habit of jumpstarting your brain. And so, any habit, whether it's working out or whatever, you're not going to always see the result right away. But here you are actually seeing a result right away. 2 days later, but the more you do it, obviously, you get the result that actually sticks. So how often did he train?
Yeah. So, in the period between these two, he trained about twice a week. Okay. But it was actually easy. So as being a parent, getting him to train was easy because he's an archer or an athlete. And so he would be like, okay, I got a competition. I'm going to train up, because what he found was that when he'd shoot archery, his group would go from this to this. Okay. And he liked winning. So he wasn't training to fix his brain. He was training to kick ass.
Right.
And the fact that me as a parent didn't have to guide him, he was just on it, made it really easy for me to do. And I knew back behind the scene that, while he was doing this, his brain was healing. And I just got to watch him flourish as a student and, as a social being, where he had great relationships with all his friends. And it made my job as a parent easy, because, I mean, what a fun kid to hang out with. I'm going to drift into another story, which is a little different timeline. Here's a story about a woman named Jill, and our house burned down and we had to move to town, and I was over to party across the street. And basically, she says, I met her. I said, "Oh, how you doing?" And she said, "Oh, my life sucks." I'm like, "My goodness, what happened?" And she says, "Oh, I had 3 concussions over the past 18 months and they have ruined my life." I'm like, "Oh, geez." And I had remembered the story about what happened with Dakota. And I just looked at her and I said, "I think I might be able to help if you're willing to trust me a little bit." And she says, pretty much, "I got nothing to lose."
Right.
So I had her come over, and this is the same test. And so the important point about this one was, this is back in 2013. And the first test we took was 11 o'clock in the morning. And if you look here, you see all of these reds. These are neurological scores that were basically in the very low category.
Okay.
So she trained, and, she just kind of bounced back immediately. So the second test is at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So approximately 2 hours later. Okay. So if you look at this, you'll see that, her reaction time went from a first column, which is very low, to well above average. Very low, above average, very low to average, very low to average. So what was interesting is, in that one workout, in only 2 hours, these parts of her brain that she needed to have to use flip back on.
Wow, like turning on the light switch.
Turning on the light switch. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, what? You got to be kidding me. And then that's when I started to realize that, a lot of the loss of function in the brain was a result of, these kind of bruises, and the brain wasn't actually injured a lot of the times. And if you could turn the blood flow back on, back to that, okay, get that circuit going and blast it with 24 times more than normal, boom, it popped back on.
Okay.
And so, and the next question that comes in here, and so, I worked with her again. Let's see, this is 2013. This is about a week later. So she came back a week later, and some of her scores continued to improve. And then the question everybody asks, like, yeah, Mark, that's great. How long does it last? So I reached out to her back in, July of 2017, and I had her take another test. So roughly 4 years later, everything that she accomplished in the first sessions with no repeated trainings was still there.
Oh, so she only did those like week-long training, 3 sessions.
Yeah, it was 3 sessions over 2 to 3 weeks.
So, wow, that's amazing. So why did she ever end up getting one, or did you say, hey, if you keep doing this?
Well, I said, look, you probably want to think about this, but the problem was back in this time frame, she was so traumatized from being, she's an artist. Right. She was so traumatized both financially because she'd lost her income. She couldn't work. Okay, so, say, hey, you ought to get one of these for home. It didn't make any sense to her because she couldn't afford it because she hadn't been able to work for the past 18 months. Okay, so, after here, so she had, 2 years worth of catching up because she couldn't make any money, so it's only now, like several years later, I can go back to her and say, hey, maybe you ought to get one of these so that you can, stay on top of your game. But, that's the thing that goes on when you're working with somebody that's been injured like that. Their whole life is so messed up. And unless they've got a support network, like, if you're a parent, you got a kid that's playing football or something like that, or if you're an executive and you say, wow, I need to be at the top of my game every day, it's sometimes hard to justify a purchase because you can't know what's going to happen. And, the other point would be when we did this, I didn't know this was going to happen. I mean, to me, it was an experiment. So I couldn't in good faith say, oh, this is going to fix you, because I hadn't done it enough times to be able to feel like I was telling her the truth.
Right. Yeah. And I like the first thing I think of is, people that are kind of chronically stressed, people that are in like a parasympathetic phase, or even people that are overweight. Like, I don't know if you've ever done studies on maybe weight loss on this, or like just the mindset of people who are overweight is it's got to be like a constant stress to worry and think about having to lose weight or having to do that, just like somebody would be around stress. So I don't know if you've ever done that, but it would be interesting to.
Well, we actually do it all the time.
Okay.
So like most people that end up getting a LiveO2, they do it for a whole list of reasons. Number one, we're talking about being smarter all the time here. That's always a good thing. But a lot of people that have, the mental function, they also end up feeling tired, fatigue, depression, and stuff like that. And it turns out, like in the same thing, like at 11 o'clock in the morning, Jill was depressed. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, she was happy as a clam. It turned out, there were things that were wrong in specific parts of her brain that were injured, but there were other things that were happening. And when we oxygenate her brain, many of those things went away. Now, to get to the weight point, when you're depressed and you're tired all the time, you don't feel good enough to do much.
Right.
So after now, since we did this first experiment, we've positioned or placed, several thousand LiveO2 systems, and people that have a weight problem, they will drop between 5 and 15 pounds by doing nothing more than working out for 15 minutes a day.
Right.
And do you work with many, like performance athletes?
Yeah, I have several. Yeah, I've worked with them several times, and like Division I athletes, stuff like that. So yeah.
Well, one of the other fun ones is we did, I'll call it a pilot study. It's just a case study. So there's an N equal 1 at this point. I mean, we've got quite a few observations, but we did an 11-week training program with a fellow where we did, he was kind of he is a student. He just went back to school. He'd been working in the pharmaceutical industry for a while. Anyway, so we did a VO2 max test on him before he started LiveO2. And then we did a second VO2 max test on him at the end of the first week. All right, let me throw you a question. How much VO2 max do you think he gained in 7 15-minute workouts.
I would say probably double.
He gained 8% measured VO2 max.
Okay. Wow.
Okay. Then he went back. We would let it ride for a month. So he went, I think it was either 4 or 5 weeks. All right, take another guess. How much, and this is 15-minute workout a day. How much VO2 max do you think he gained by the end of the 5th week?
20%.
You got it, 18%.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And then he went for 11 weeks. So guess what his exit success rate at week number 11 was?
I don't know.
30%, dropped 9 pounds.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
And, this is, and the point would be, it wasn't about that, but as his energy level went up, he was able to be more active all the time. The other thing, he called me, he says, Mark, you ruined my life. I'm like, what? He said, I went to a Christmas party. I had to drink 4 times more to get a buzz. Because what had happened, when we're doing this thing about getting your brain going, what happens is the body squirts so much more blood through the liver, heart, and kidneys that his whole natural detox process and his liver started working so much better that he was processing, if you just take it at face value, maybe it was only 2 times as much, but he was twice as able to eliminate toxins from his body. So he had to drink more to party.
And the thing I'm looking at is you have, visual memory, verbal memory, composite memory. You have reaction time, attention, flexibility, speed. Like these are all things that we look for, like every day in life, whether it's, just functioning better at whatever we're doing in life or being an athlete. Like this really can help anybody, not just, athletes. And so I think that's really cool that you're able to track all this stuff and actually see the improvement of somebody.
Yeah, I'm going to show you a couple more things here. All right, this is my personal story. Okay, so, again, I don't have any known head injuries or anything like that. I'm just a guy trying to run a company. But, when I did the first experiment with Dakota, I'm like, well, what's this going to do for me? So, this is the same day, May 11th. All right. And this is my starting score. I'm kind of average, low average, and I was pretty well stressed out. So whatever. Anyway, I trained with Dakota. All right. These are my Wednesdays, 48 hour later scores after 1 training session. All my X's moved left to 2. And as far as I know, I wasn't all that messed up.
Yeah. You just got better.
I got better. And I was like, that's when I started to realize that, if I'm trying to work or do any kind of job, it doesn't matter if I work with my hands or my mind or I'm on the phone, anything that I can do to be just a little bit sharper is well worth the investment. And I'm like, wow, that would be a really great way for me to start my day.
Yeah. I've worked out for like 30 years, but it's like, I'm all about looking at, okay, how do I maximize my workouts? How do I maximize? Because really for me, I'm working out because of what it gives me for the rest of my day. I did the thing for a long time where it was about, okay, how does my biceps look? How do my chest look? But now I'm at the place where I'm like, okay, how do I leverage what I got from my workout and bring that into my relationships, not only with my wife, my kids, my clients, but also how does this affect how I show up in everyday life, encompassing my whole person. And I think that's really cool is what I'm hearing is it just makes you better at life.
It makes your body happier.
Yeah.
And one of the things, there's a couple of different points. So a lot of people out there, in our high stress lifestyle, it's really easy to go 2, 3, 4 years without working out.
Yeah.
You see a lot of that. It's like you get tied up in your work and you're like, oh, and then, we're always used to thinking, oh, gee, if I'm going to work out, it's got to hurt, because I'm going to go work out. My muscles are going to be sore. And a lot of people will put off getting started because they know it's going to hurt. And so one of the other things that we discovered was I'll call it, I won't go on the science, but basically almost nobody that trained with LiveO2 has ever gotten sore. I'm not saying it's impossible, but very few people. And that gets into some science, but basically whenever you got a sore muscle, the mechanism says, or popular philosophy says, well, I've got too much lactic acid in the muscle, therefore it's sore because the muscle's, trending acidic.
Right.
Well, what we discovered when we were doing this training, especially with the pro athletes, I mean, the big one was I was training some of these guys, in Cleveland, they're 340 pounds. What was happening, they'd be beat up and stuff, and they'd try to train, and then I'd train them, and then they'd be like, uh-oh, but they've got 340 pounds of body mass. They would get off the system, and all of their soreness would be gone, or most of it, I should say. Okay, but the really big surprise was I'd see them reach down and kind of rub underneath their right rib cage. And when I see them do that, I just say, you don't want to be trusting any farts for the next hour or so. Because what was happening was all of their soreness was because of this inflammation that I talked about with Ardennes. They had overstressed, and the blood flow to the muscles had been compromised. When we super oxygenated the capillaries in that muscle, all those capillaries opened up, and all the lactic acid that was being built in the muscle would wash out in the bloodstream and go to the liver, and they'd have to get rid of it. And it's like, now that's really interesting. These guys started training sore, but by the time they were finished, they were not sore. Now, this doesn't happen to most people because, like, these guys are 300 plus pounds of muscle. Sure. So when you release all of that lactic acid from the muscle, it's too much for the liver. But, the point is, like on a regular workout, if you're training hard, if you use LiveO2 at the backside of that workout, you will be vastly less sore, and you'll recover from your workout in about half normal time.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I don't know anything else that can do that.
It makes you smarter, makes you feel better. And I mean, I tell you what, I'm just having so much fun, helping people and, seeing them, live much better quality of life. And it's just ridiculous.
So can you explain kind of what the difference of products that you guys carry with this? And, is this a certain system you're talking about? Because I think you guys have 3 to 4 different systems, correct?
Yeah, the basics of LiveO2, our main product or flagship, is called adaptive contrast, which is the feature that changes you from oxygen rich to oxygen poor. We have another product called LiveO2 Standard, but we don't push it very much because some years ago we discovered that basically if you give somebody too much oxygen, rather than opening up the vascular system, it closes it down. Okay. So when we tried to, in the beginning when I was starting to work with it, we definitely saw improvement in cognitive function, but nothing like when we did the adaptive. So as we worked with the oxygen training and exercise stuff, what we found is we got 2 to 3 times more physiological result using the adaptive. So our main flagship product is the adaptive contrast. And what we discovered is when we did sell somebody or set somebody up with an oxygen only trainer, there's several problems. Number one, they plateaued in a couple of weeks. Number two, it was really hard for them to, do this brain kind of training stuff. And the big one was they got bored.
Sure.
Because they buy it because they had a health issue. Their health issue would partially resolve, but when we went with the adaptive contrast, they sort of never noticed that when they made the transition from somebody that was trying to help themselves overcome something to, hey, I'm a monster athlete. And here's a good story. We started working with a guy named Ben Menifee about a year ago. All right, he had a major accident in Afghanistan. He was in the military. Basically, he hit his head, ended up with a major brain bleed. And he had been working with hyperbaric chamber. Well, what's happening now is he went from paralyzed, retired his wheelchair. And I talked to him yesterday. He's got to the point where his paralysis is reversing. But the really fun part, he says, yeah, Mark, I'm training. He's actually talking about and moved from, okay, I'm a guy that's been crippled to no, I'm an athlete. And just watching that transition from somebody that says, oh, I've lost the quality of my life to going into, okay, I'm a guy that's going to go out and kick ass and there is no limit to what I can do anymore.
Yeah, that's amazing. So let me ask you this. So somebody buys this adaptive contrast machine that they get from you. Is there a piece of equipment that they use when they're using this? Is this
Sure. Right.
Mask?
Right. So I'll set you up with some collaterals, but basically the system is basically a mask. This is a premium mask. So what you do is you put on a mask that connects to a reservoir and you use LiveO2. You breathe while you're working out.
Okay.
So like we like spin bikes. Assault bike is really great. You get an assault bike and you put LiveO2 next to it, and then you put the switch on your assault bike. So you're going, and then you throw the switch. You're on top of a mountain. It gets hard. Your heart starts pounding and you say, oh, gee, I got to recover. You throw the switch to oxygen, you recover, you say, oh, I feel better. You go back to the top of the mountain and you go. And so you just go back and forth, hard to easy, and you give yourself this great workout. And then once you're done, you say, wow, I've had enough. And then you just go ahead and stop working out. So if you work out, it takes the same time or maybe even less time than you spend on an existing workout. So it doesn't affect your day. But when you finish that workout, you just feel good.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is, you just have to be in a remote area close to the machine. And so you could use, a rower, you could use the assault bike, you could probably do any type of
treadmill, rebounder. One of my favorite things to do after I do my workout is hop in the sauna, and do some sweat. And it has a weight loss objective. You do your active workout and then you go do, some time in the sauna and sweat. And that's really the magic combo for losing weight. Okay. So if you get that sweat, because you got to go. So yeah, it's like, it's basically a breathing system that you put next to any piece of existing workout equipment. And, you control what you breathe to work out. And so controlling what you're breathing enables you to, use the low oxygen mixture to amplify the physiology of the circulatory system while you're working out. Right. And then once you get that going, you throw a switch, you breathe oxygen, and then that basically supersaturates your body with the oxygen. So, I guess a way to think about it is, I'm sure about high intensity interval training.
Sure. Yeah. I was just wondering if you could, still emulate that and just have the equipment right around you where you're at, kind of like a bike, but it's really like almost like 10xing high intensity interval training.
That's exactly what it does. So, and it doesn't, and what's weird and interesting is it doesn't matter what kind of athlete you are. Okay. So like my dad is 80 years old. He'll do the same form of workout that I do. Okay, he doesn't have the power, but being able to do his 60 watts or whatever he does on top of a mountain activates his vascular system, just like it does when we work with a top end athlete. So it's like whoever you are, being able to do more and recover faster and get that oxygenation basically helps everybody. So it does, like I say, people say, oh, gee, this seems like a super high end deal for elite athletes. Nothing could be farther from the truth. In fact, if you're handicapped or limited, this is the magic bullet that actually helps you be more fit and gain fitness faster.
Wow. And it sounds like it could possibly get some of your, movement back and things that maybe have been restricted in the past, by injury or trauma or head injuries.
Well, it's like any injury in the body. So, if you think about an injury, because we, as we get older, what happens is a lot of the function we lose is lost because our bodies lose the ability to deliver oxygen to tissue. So Let's use a word like arthritis. Okay. Arthritis affects your cartilage, ligaments, and tendons. Okay. What color are those tissues? They're white.
White, yeah, white blood cells.
Well, no,
Or
they're white
red blood.
because they don't have a capillary bed.
Okay.
So blood doesn't go through them. Okay, but it turns out those white tissues are exactly the ones that fall apart first because, as you're getting older, I got some arthritis. Well, what we sort of started discovering is like, look, if you oxygenate those tissues by super oxygenating the body, a lot of the degeneration that happens to those that we all blame on age starts to go backwards in time. So, and that's one of I'm coming up on 60 years old, and I'll go out and do wind sprint, stuff like that. And, for a guy that works out, sit 15 minutes a day, that's pretty good. I can't keep up with my 19-year-old, and I probably can't keep up with my 15-year-old anymore, but I can still slam up a big hill. And being able to do that while I'm watching all my buddies, go downhill, I'm like, man, dude, you got to try this. So, I mean, if you want to think about helping yourself not get old and being able to maintain, your quality of life, it's, oxygenating everything. So when you get in, you talk about training and something that's really very inexpensive, both from time, it works. And when you start to say, well, because as we get older, when I started this whole project about, 10, 12 years ago, I wrote down everything that I thought was wrong with my body. Since I was about 19, I'd get up in the morning with super glue and I glue the cracks on my feet shut. Because I didn't know what caused it. It turns out that, the skin growth on my feet was messed up because I had inflammation in that layer beneath. Wow. Literally the next day, when I started training, I haven't had a foot crack in 12 years because I didn't know that was what caused it, but I was really happy when it went away. So there's all kinds of stupid stuff that was going on. The other ones, like I like to drink wine, and I'll drink a glass of whiskey. And sometimes I'll drink more than somebody says you might want to, and I'll wake up not feeling so well the next morning. Guess how long that lasts?
15 minutes.
Yeah.
If that.
So, being able to recover from your own stupidity the next day in a few minutes and not walk around like, I feel like crap.
Right.
And, makes a difference because, at the end of the day, I think it's all about how much fun can you have, and being able to share the whole concept with having fun, being able to keep your family more healthy. And let me drip back into one of the other points I think matters. When I started down this path, I said, I want to be able to take care of myself and my family every day.
Sure.
So when I designed the product, I said, where do you want it? Well, the truth is, I want it right outside my office. I want it where I can use it. My kids can use it anytime they want. My wife can use it, and anybody I need. So when we designed the product, it's really designed or intended, for a home use product, so you can use it whenever you need it. Now, by the way, one of the other ones that's interesting, guess how many years it's been since any of us have set foot in a doctor's office?
Probably 10, 12 years.
Never.
Really? Wow.
None of my kids has ever set foot in a doctor's office. And I haven't since I invented LiveO2. And that's not to say it's magic and it prevents everything from going wrong, but it's powerful enough as a home utility that if you keep your body well oxygenated, your energy production stays high. And because of that, many of the things that we're all used to hearing about going wrong as we get older either go wrong so much more slowly or not at all, that you just end up with, number one, your starting health list. My starting list of health issues went from this to 0 in about 6 months.
Wow.
And I was really happy. And then when something did go wrong with my kids, like I showed you on the brain thing, it's like, well, I had the tools in-house or at home that I could use to help everybody I cared about be better and live better.
Yeah, that's amazing. So when you buy one of those things, does it come with that score, or is that something special you have?
No, that's basically if, most of our customers, if they've got a brain recovery agenda, what we'll do is we'll set them up. We've got a process online where they fill out a form and then we'll send them a copy of the test, and then they can take a before test and after test. And that lets us help our customers, sort of monitor the restoration of their brain function and see kind of where they are, which is helpful. It's like, because we all wonder, is like, well, what's this? How screwed up am I? And okay, did it really help me? And putting people in a position where they've got the tools to answer those questions is always appreciated.
Yeah, man, I got about 8.5, 9 years of amateur boxing and about 8.5, 9 years of football, including a little bit of college football. So,
well, it'd be fun. Maybe we can do another podcast. We can do, your brain function differential.
Yeah, I bet you. I bet you there's some spots that aren't working too well.
Yeah, actually, I have another fun one. If you give me a second.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: there's obviously, the huge brain benefit. Is there like a respiratory benefit? Because we're talking about oxygen, but you have people with asthma, all kinds of breathing disorders and things like that. Is there much improvement you've seen with like people with asthma or things like that?
Well, I kind of shy away from answering specific questions about various conditions.
Okay.
Let me give you a blanket statement. Our success rate in helping people improve their quality of life, no matter what is wrong with them, is about 100%.
Okay.
I mean, we've had a few people who we haven't been able to help at all, but that's a very small list. And so when they start talking about, I'll call it especially respiratory dysfunction. I mean, if you measure their performance or their VO2 max or their ability to do the things that they like to do to get through their day, there's virtually always an improvement. And so, if you think about healthy, being healthy, and then whatever is sick is not healthy, the healthy part of the body expands. So the sick part of the body is going to shrink. And you can always see that as an improvement in functional capacity to do anything that they want to do. It can be run a company, it can be play with your kids. But that's just, if you get back to it, it's ridiculously simple, because when your body's got the oxygen it needs, it is going to be able to make more energy. And when it makes more energy, it's going to work better. And when it works better, you're going to heal better. Your immune system's going to work better, and you're going to live better.
Sure.
And that's why we call the product LiveO2, because life is for living, and we want people, all of our customers, to be able to live until something happens where they can't.
All right.
As late as possible.
Okay. So one last thing. So you have a lot of stuff out now, like HRV, heart rate variability. Have you guys done any testing with that to see?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's you can test the performance of LiveO2 with about any device, here's one. This is basically, it's called iHeart. It's a pulse wave velocity tester. Once you train, you can look at your internal age, go backwards. If you do HRV, we had a fella here last week. I'd show you his brain test because they changed amazingly too. Literally the first night he used LiveO2, he registered the best sleep he's registered ever by using his Whoop.
Wow. Okay.
By the end of the week, he had completely he had rolled back all of his bad numbers by a very substantial amount. It was like, so, when you do this oxygen thing, everything's going to work better. So almost no matter how you measure it, I mean, you can go to the doctor and do blood tests, and, the typical thing you'll see is, again, if you take a list of, I can't say let's put it like this. If you look at all the things in your blood tests and your body that go wrong, using LiveO2 will move most people back about 15 years in that list of problems. Okay, it's not overnight. It takes time. But if you can reclaim that 15 years worth of stuff and start moving forward, not only can you go back, but when you go back and you start repeating all the stuff, this needle moves forward a lot more slowly than it moved back. So again, you can get the quality of life. I can't make any statements about how much longer you live, but I can guarantee you that when you go through this aging process for the rest of your life, every day will be better than what it would have been without LiveO2.
Sure. Well, I mean, you could just say every day would be better with more oxygen.
Yep.
So I think what's cool is, like I'm asking you about, because I have a Whoop, and so it's nice to be able to use things like this nowadays and actually see the result. Because when you see the result, you're like, okay, well now I need to do this more to really see the bigger and longer benefit of it. But what I've heard you say is, listen, if you do this 2-3 times, I can show you evidence that this has worked for somebody, over an extended period. Or if you do it every day or, 3-4 days a week, then you can still see a even bigger improvement, even if you weren't that bad, which is kind of what I got from you was, hey, mine wasn't that bad, but it just made me that much better. And, if you're an athlete, if you're an executive, if you're a mom, whatever, like everybody wants to be better. And I think that's the key point in all of this is this actually makes you better in everything, like internally and externally.
Well, the story I just told, the fellow I worked with the week before last, he had the Whoop. And he came in just kind of looking at it, shaking his head, saying, oh, my God, that's the best sleep I ever had, because his sleep score went from an average of about 42 to an average of 82.
Wow.
Okay, by the end of the week, he reported a sleep score of 92. Okay, and his overtraining, because, he was training hard, and he came in, he worked out, and he looked at his Whoop, and he said, get off the hardest workout he's been able to do in 20 years. And his Whoop would say, okay, you're ready to go work out after he finished. Okay, and so, as you look at the process, you almost had real-time instrumentation of his physiology evolving with the Whoop. And I would say that about anybody that wants to test and monitor, you'd want to use some sort of biometric like a Whoop to go ahead and, make sure that you're seeing, pretty much everybody sees the same thing.
Real-time evidence. And, for me, is one of the things that I realized from wearing Whoop is, working out is a physical stress, but, work and life is a mental stress. And that has much more of an effect on recovery a lot of times than the physical stress. And so, this to me is like, hey, if I sleep better, that's improving my mental stress. If I'm getting more oxygen into my brain, that's improving my mental stress, which helps me perform at a higher level. And that's where I feel like our society's kind of stuck with, cell phones, all these different things that we're constantly getting stimulated, that we're just in this constant parasympathetic state. And it's like no one knows how to get out of it.
Yeah. Actually, I think we're stuck sympathetic, because we're stuck in the angry fight or flight, and it's like, you sit at your desk. I've been at my desk since 3:00 this morning, and it's like, okay, I get there and something comes along. I get that little drop of adrenaline. I'm like, eh. And then, being able to go on that, and then knowing that in a half-hour workout, I can unwind all of that, so that when I finish my day, I'll go down and I hang out with the kids, and I'm not going to have that residual with me. And I could be, oh, Dad, and I'll be able to chase them around the house, give them smooch attacks, and feel like that, hey, I want to emotionally engage, as opposed to packing the garbage that annoyed me all day.
So you're saying, like, we might need to do this 15 minutes at the beginning of the day and before you go home, so you can really show up, as the best version of you.
Well, that's it. Yeah. And it's like, we've done a lot of work with veteran recovery and PTSD, and I'll not get into it, but that's some of the main feedback we get, which is, just when your brain's oxygenated and you kind of got a normal stress recovery pattern, the ability to be nice to the people you love pretty much all the time. I mean, it's just the most beautiful gift in the world. It's like, hey, you got to chase your wife around, give her a hug and all that stuff. It's just, feeling like you want to do that is like great. But, you get all stuck off in the stress pattern where you're like, oh, you can't quite let go of stuff. It's, you start drifting, and all of a sudden, if you stay there too long, all of a sudden your life starts to kind of go off track because you just become less able to maintain those relationships.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the same thing, when you go to work. If you can be that nice, giggly person that people like to work with, telling jokes and kind of cracking up in meetings and, still being able to address serious stuff, you be that nice boss. And, that makes a big difference in, at the end of the day, how well a company works.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. So if somebody was interested in getting one of these, how would they do that?
LiveO2.com. Our phone number's on every page. Just ring us up and call in, and we'll do everything we can to help you. We've got the best people in the world working with us. Fun to hang out with, and we bend over backwards to make sure everybody has a good experience with our product.
Yeah, because you're all on LiveO2, right?
Yep, LiveO2. We're all there. Exactly, and I insist, everybody train. Got to do it.
Okay, so if you guys are listening to this, I'll make sure that we get this link in the show notes. And really, the habit that we want to talk to you about today, or get out of this, is the habit of actually jump starting your brain every single morning, and how important that is for the rest of the day, so you can show up as the best version of you. So, Mark, hey, I want to thank you so much for being on here today. And I really look forward to getting my own machine and testing this out and bringing you back on and looking at the results on another podcast.
Well, that sounds great. Looking really forward to it.
Okay. If you guys are looking to connect further with a group of like-minded people, join myself and so many others in the Habit-Based Lifestyle Secrets group on Facebook, where I will be dropping daily habits to help you live to your full potential. If you want to be one of our next case studies and begin living this habit-based lifestyle, if you have questions, comments, or requests, feel free to reach out to me, Jesse, at habitbasedlifestyle.com. Until next episode, have a great day.
The purpose of this show is to guide you to realign with habits that get you to live the life you've always dreamed of. This is the Habit-Based Lifestyle Podcast with Jesse